Well, again, good morning and welcome. This is our fourth and our final week of the Growth Hour, and I appreciate you all sticking with me throughout this past month. You may not realize this, but earlier this year, this Growth Hour, I sat with the visitation team and did like a 1 hour kind of class on this, and then that's kind of what birthed into the Growth Hour. And I'll be honest, when I was asked to teach on that in a Growth Hour, I was like, how am I going to take the 1 hour and stretch that across 4 weeks of material? And now here we are at the end, and I'm like, I could probably use a couple more weeks. It's kind of how that works out. But I really do appreciate you being here. Just kind of recapping the previous weeks. We started out a few weeks ago laying a little bit of a foundation, some groundwork theologically, like why do we do visitation ministry? And then we spent the last couple weeks looking at these overarching ways that we prepare for a visit, and then how do we actually conduct a visit. But just as there is a bit of wisdom that's needed before we go in for a personal visit, there's a bit of skill that's also required at the end of the visit. And that's what I want to discuss with you in this final session today. How do we care for others skillfully in this way, particularly as it pertains to the conclusion of the visit? And what I hope that we'll see together this morning is that the end of the visit actually ushers in the beginning of a different work of ministry. It's really not the end of the visit at all. But I want to start with this point first today because it's probably one of the most often asked questions regarding visitation ministry, and is how long should a visit last? Like how long am I maybe expected to be there? How long is it appropriate for me to be there? And we've all, I think, been in those moments when someone has overstayed their welcome. And it might not be in visitation ministry. I'm just saying hospitality-wise, you've been there and you've had some guests that maybe didn't pick up on social cues. Maybe that's been you, and you're like, oh, I didn't read the room well. I overstayed. I actually want to begin with a discussion question as we begin our time together today. Have you ever experienced that? Have you ever experienced a visit that went on far too long? And the question I want you to maybe share is, how did you know it was time to go? Or what hints have you attempted to give other people that it was, maybe time for them to leave? So how do we pick that up? Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Thanksgiving, notorious for this, right? Everybody's over, they're having a good time, and they're caught up in conversation. And so, yeah, you just, you know what? I'm getting my pajamas. I'm ready to go to bed, right? You all can stay or do whatever you want to do, but I'm going to sleep, right? Yeah. And so you just kind of, yeah, give them that cue right there. Yeah. 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 I mean, if you could pick up just the look, right? I mean, right, yeah, you get that look. I mean, yeah, maybe you just notice some body mannerisms. They're checking the clock, or they're kind of just looking around. They've obviously disengaged from that conversation. Or you just kind of get that look, like, okay, yeah, I need to pay attention. And then we talked about that last week during the visit, the importance of not just the words, but in communication, really paying attention to body language. And that's one of the reasons, is because there's going to be those social cues that, I can probably wind this down, right? Any other thoughts? Yeah, please. Yes. Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah, the Midwest goodbye. Yeah, and it is problematic, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Love it. Yeah, so one, I love the like you're gonna employ your children to bear the bad news, right? And so you just get your kids, start handing out coats. It's time for you to go, right? But I love that. And honestly, and we'll talk about this, nothing wrong with the direct approach, right? And just saying, well, it's time to go. And that's often what my wife will do at Thanksgiving. Well, y'all, it's time to leave, right? So, yeah. Here's a reality, and we could probably discuss this point for a while. And this is one of the difficulties when it comes to a visitation, is that there is no hard and fast rule about how long a visit really should last. And it really does depend on the individual as well as the setting that you find yourself visiting in, doesn't it? Um, but I'm going to give you a few general rules that we should be able to consider. Like, if you're visiting in a hospital and a nursing home, those are probably going to be shorter. They're gonna err on the shorter side of visitation. Aim for 10, 15 minutes or so. It doesn't have to be hours at a time. Hospital and nursing staff often come and go, and so there's often many interruptions if you're trying to stay for an extended visit. Frankly, I find working in a care center, my residents are usually always in one of three states at any given point in time. They are either preparing to fall asleep, or they are sleeping, or they're just waking up from having slept. That's usually where they are at all states and time. And that's something I need to be aware of, right? They may not have the energy for a longer visit. And on the other side of that, you might be visiting someone within their home, right? And now that's way more comfortable. And as a result, those visits tend to go a little bit longer. A home visit often doesn't offer a natural opportunity to dismiss yourself, like maybe a doctor or a therapist interrupting the conversation would. And so sometimes, for lack of a better way to phrase it, you can feel a little trapped. Like, how do I end this gracefully? Those might be closer to 30, 45, even 60-minute visits. Again, there's no hard rule here. And I would actually really advise against creating such a rule, because I think it can lead to one simply keep checking the clock. Just kind of gauge how the conversation is going. You'll get that cue. If the conversation is flowing, let it keep flowing. Especially if you have the time. If you feel it winding down, there's no problem in saying, I think that's the conclusion of the visit. A few things I want to offer, though, as kind of guidelines when you're establishing this, okay? The first thing you need to ask is, was this a planned visit, right? Was this a planned visit? Planned visits can often last longer. The time was prepared for. It was set aside. And the other positive of a planned visit is that you can kind of schedule the duration, can't you? You can say, like, hey, look, would it be okay if I stopped by and just visited with you, say for 30 minutes or so? Can I just have 30 minutes of your time just to check in and see how you're doing? And you kind of already set that duration. An impromptu visit is often shorter by nature. And that's often one of the ways that I try to gracefully conclude a visit. As I say, I'm so sorry for interrupting your afternoon, but I really appreciate you giving me a few minutes today. But I'm sure you would enjoy the opportunity just to rest and to relax. So, but thank you for allowing me to spend time with you. And that's all it takes. Now, the other question we have to consider is, are they experiencing pain? Like, are they in pain? That's going to shorten your visit. If I sense that they're uncomfortable and they are in pain, I might simply say, hey, look, I know I stopped by unexpectedly today. Thank you for letting me interrupt your afternoon, but I really know it's important for you to get some rest. And so I just want to pray with you before I leave, if that's okay. And then the third thing we need to consider, have they been inundated with other visitors already? Right? Have they already been inundated by other visitors? As a rule, especially in a center like ours, I actually try not to visit my residents when they first move into the facility, because that's already a crazy whirlwind for them. They have so many things that they're trying to figure out, people coming and going. The last thing they need is for yet another person to come in and interrupt their settling in. So I give them a little bit of space first, and then I come in. Another thing to consider when I'm visiting, I often hear from my residents, oh man, yeah, therapy's been by today, or the nurse stopped in, and then, yeah, they came by with my meal. And I'm like, I get it. You've had a lot of interruptions, right? And so I just listen for that and know I'm going to keep my visit a lot shorter. The more they've been visited already, the shorter my visit is likely to be. So there can be a tendency to stay way too long. Like the individual may be the only one you're visiting, and sometimes we kind of have that thought, like, well, I've taken the trouble to come. I might as well make it worthwhile. Or, I don't want them to feel like I'm rushed, so I'm going to try to improve the quality of my visit by the duration of that visit. Okay? Don't make that mistake. Depending on the condition of the person that you're visiting, a long visit actually may only become a further trial to that individual, right? And at the same time, you may sense that your presence could be a comforting assurance. They might need you to stay there for a while. I've been there where we're actually not in conversation. What I'm gauging is this resident just needed someone to be with them. And we sit there quietly together. Sometimes I just fall asleep, and that's my cue. I think it's time for me to go. But they just needed someone there that they could have that comfort, that assurance that it's going to be okay. The length of your stay, this goes back to last week, the length of your stay, it has to be discerned by your sensitivity to that individual's needs. Okay? So just be mindful of that. Sometimes we say, well, this is all I got. I'm going to rush in and kind of get this done, or I have nothing else going on, so I'm going to stay as long as I please. That's about you. Don't make that mistake. But how do we get there? Once we kind of sense it, how do we graciously end a visit, right? Because despite some of these guidelines, knowing when to end a visit, it can be difficult to know how to end the visit. And there may be certain clues and indicators that provide a natural and a graceful strategy for it, but you don't always get those moments either. You certainly don't want to rush the visit, but there are individuals, we all know, who can monopolize your time. And you need to consider that. You need to be aware of that during the visit. And so before I share some tips on this point, again, I'm going to be curious to hear from some of you. I know some of you have experience in visitation ministry, which is why you're in this growth hour. Or perhaps your experience comes from the moments when you have simply entertained guests or through general hospitality. But every gathering needs an ending. So I'm interested to hear what you have found to be effective. We talked about some of the cues, but what are some practical ways that you to graciously end a visit without making that person feel rushed? Okay, without making them feel unimportant. Similar to our first question, but I really want to focus on that second part. How do we do this gracefully without making them feel rushed, without making them feel unimportant? Any tips or strategies or thoughts on that? Please. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, no, I love that. I mean, again, when in doubt, just ask them, right? And that's again a gracefully way, and just defer to them and say, yeah, especially if it's unplanned, and say, hey, I realize I stopped by, and you might have a lot of other things on your schedule today. I just want to be aware of that. Do you need to be ready for anything at a particular point in time? Do you try to have a rest planned in there? I just want to be sensitive to that and not overstay. Just go ahead and ask them. Any other thoughts? How do we gracefully end without them feeling rushed or unimportant to us? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And again, just kind of the just being candid and blunt. Like, I don't want to overstay, and sometimes that gives them the freedom to say, "Yeah, I appreciate you stopping by," or they say, "Oh no, not at all." Right, and you kind of can gauge it from there. Please. Yeah. Yeah. If you're in a care facility, try to figure out when meal times are. They're not going to be necessarily when your meal times are, right? And be aware of that, because the last thing you really want to do is to, one, make them feel like they can't eat their meal because you're there visiting, or put them in the awkward position of having you watch them eat their meal. Unless some people do need assistance and you can make that a part of your visit. But yeah, just even asking that, hey, I realize I'm probably right around dinner time. When is that typically served? Okay, I'm not going to stay past. I want to make sure that you can enjoy a warm meal, and just use that as an opportunity, right? Let me offer a few things, because those are some great practical examples. But even as you are kind of winding down your visit, these have been kind of alluded to in previous sessions. But I want to encourage you, as you're winding down, check in to see what other needs that they might have that you can meet. I often will exit and say, before I leave today, might there be anything that I could do for you before I leave? Sometimes they'll have like a food tray, and like, would you mind taking that out for me? Like, yeah, not at all. And that's, again, an opportunity for me to serve them and end the visit, right? But just ask, are there any needs that I could meet for you this today? Simply, again, ask if you can pray for them. If you don't know what to say, like, well, would you mind if I closed our time in prayer, right? If they don't stop talking, I found this to be a really useful way to get them to stop talking so you can end the meeting, okay? Now, that said, by the way, this should be how you always end your meetings, right? With prayer. That should be the target. Whether you're in a home or in a care facility, we need to pray the hope of God in Christ into those moments. And so that really should be the conclusion to each and every meeting. So maybe that's just it. Like, can I close this out in prayer today? Another way, say, hey, as I'm wrapping up, might there be another person that I could have follow up with you? You know, maybe it's appropriate to say, I really enjoyed my time today. Do you think it would be okay if I came back and visited again with you next week? And that time, when you have to end that, they might be disappointed, but they know, oh, you're coming next week, or you're going to come in a few days. Just assuring that there's going to be follow-up. You know, we're not going to ghost you at the end of this visit. Express gratitude for their time. Thank you so much, again, for allowing me to interrupt your morning, your afternoon. Maybe another way you can gracefully end it, if there is anything you admire about that person or that you can acknowledge from your conversation, state that back to them in that moment and say, you know, look, I'm just incredibly honored that you shared your struggles with me today. I know none of this is easy for you, and that took a lot of courage for you to be able to talk to me about your fears. And I just want to thank you for doing that with me today. Could I pray with you? Ask them about coming back, or if there might be someone who needs to know they are in the hospital. And might there be any communication that you can pass along? Make a summarizing comment of any of the significant themes with any actions that are going to be taken. This goes back to last week where we talked about that active listening. And say, you know what I really heard you say today, and just kind of summarize that. And you know what I'm going to do, if it's okay with you, I would love to take this back to our prayer chain ministry and just let them know how we can be praying for you today. Sometimes, we talked about this at the beginning, you just need to be direct. You can kindly but firmly state, you know, it is time for me to go. I'm going to have to be leaving now. Or I have to leave, but I really enjoyed our time together. Okay? You can fake a phone call. Okay, don't do that one. I'm just kidding, okay? Just making sure you're still with me. But I really would encourage against saying things like, hey, I have other things to do, okay? Or, hey, I really need to go see someone else, so I need to end our time here or have another meeting. And all those things might be true. But we need to work on a more tactful way to end that visit that does not evaluate some other task or some other person over that present moment, okay? You don't want to end your visit by causing that individual to feel as if they've inconvenienced you or like you had to squeeze them somehow into your schedule. You're in that room because that individual, at least for this moment in time, is the most important place, the most important person that you needed to spend time with. And you should leave making them feel as if that is true. It is helpful as you leave to determine what the expectation of each person is as to how often you visit. Some people might just want that one visit. I really appreciate that you guys know I'm here and that you're praying for me. Thank you. Some people may want another visit that's like, say, 4 days later. And so as you leave, that's again another simple thing that you can say. I really enjoyed our time, and I'm wondering if you would like me to visit you at another time. What might be appropriate? Another cue that we should be cognizant of during our visitations. We need to be aware of your limitations, right? Your limitations. When we determine how long to stay for a visit or how many visits to make, you need to consider what it is that you can handle as the one doing the visiting. There may be seasons of visitation ministry where you say, I can't take all of this. And you need to step away from making visits altogether for a season. I don't know if you've ever been in a moment like that before, but let's consider that. This is my other discussion question I want to throw out there for you. What are some signs, maybe, that we might need a break from visitation ministry? What are some healthy ways that we can process the emotions that can arise from visitation ministry? Okay, so any thoughts on that? What are some maybe cues that I need to take a break from this, or I need to process this in a better way? Tracy? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, when it begins to feel more like a burden rather than something that excites you. When you find yourself using the language, it's something I have to do today, rather than I get to spend time with this person. You move from that, from obligation. You moved away from delight into obligation, right? And they can sense that. We talked about this in one of our first weeks, why we need to prepare our hearts going into that. We're going to carry that heart into that visitation, and we might think that we can kind of have a great facade, and they'll never pick up on it, but it'll come out, right? Yeah, yeah. When you, yeah, when you get stressed out really easily, right? We offer a support group for our caregivers, and this is one of the big signs where all of a sudden they find themselves lashing out perhaps on their loved ones, um, and they might say or even do things that they never thought they would say or do, and that's a warning sign, but it's also incredibly normal. That's a sign of burnout, caregiving burnout, and so we need to make sure that we're in a healthy place. When we're getting triggered or stressed out really easily, there's something going on beneath the surface that we need to process, right? Yes. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, when you find yourself unable to lock it in, to pay attention to other people, right? And you find yourself distracted, your mind thinking about everything from that you were dealing with before or what you got to go on next. And that happens. Life happens, and we get distracted. Sometimes in those moments too, we can kind of be aware of it, even in the midst of the visitation. And I've done this before, where again, I might be going from bedside of a resident who's passing away, and then I get another call to go visit. I mean, that's a huge pivot, right? So sometimes I'll even go into another meeting and say, would you mind if I actually began in prayer today? I'm going to be honest with you. I just feel like my mind is just really frantic. And I don't know if you've ever felt that way. But I'm really glad to be here with you. And would you just pray with me and begin your time in prayer? And that lets you really focus in and take that moment together. But I think you hit on something important there. So yeah, sometimes, I mean, again, you're involved in compassionate care ministry because you care, and it's really hard. And I see this with caregivers in particular all the time, and I can tell they're burnt out. And we say, you got to get some help, or can we help you? Whether it's at Cedar Crest or any facility, I don't care. But if we can help get your loved one into a place where they can be cared for so that you can get healthy again. But it's hard because then they feel like that's unloving, and and they can feel guilty. Those are a lot of emotions that I process, right? Because they have the caregiving heart. And it's hard to say, I can't do that. I can't do this anymore. That's a really difficult place for someone with a caregiving heart to come at. But I think you hit on a great way that we can assess that, and it's through other people in our lives too, who can more objectively see our hearts than we can. And we should maybe be aware when our family and our loved ones, friends, are saying something to us and say, I've noticed maybe you're taking on more than you can, or again, you're agitated, you're burnt out, whatever it might be. And that's okay. You're gonna serve these people best when you're at your best, right? Silly or easy analogy, but it's like when you're in an airplane in the midst of an emergency and those masks come down, and as a parent, my first inclination is put the mask on my kid, right? I mean, that makes the most sense, but no, because I'm going to do no good for them if I'm next to them unconscious, right? If I didn't take care of myself, I can't take care of other people. And that's what ultimately happens a lot in compassionate care ministry. We stop taking care of ourselves, and then we burnt out. And now no one's left to take care of those who actually need it. So, yeah, one more here. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful thing. He mentioned a sabbatical. That's often a practice in vocational ministry, but really for any sort of ministry that we're involved in, to take a step back. And I would encourage active sabbatical. And what I mean by that is not just a scaling back where I'm not taking on ministry right now, but using that as an opportunity to actively reflect upon the ministry, right? And to really assess that. What is going well? What isn't going well? Why isn't that going well? And then if you re-engage that ministry, you can come in strong and recharged and ready for it, rather than, I just took a month off or however long, and now I got to get back up to speed and figure it out. So really take time to intentionally use that, right? It is important to remain sensitive to your limitations. You're finite, you're only human, and serving in any ministry that causes us to enter into the lives of other people, especially in their most difficult of moments, is going to take its toll. And you should expect that. And if you find yourself experiencing difficulty, even sleeping or having a hard time navigating your feelings about visiting other people, you may need to take a break. It's important to stay attentive to how helping other people impacts you. It will impact you, but pay attention to how it does. Like after a visit, do you find that you can let go of an emotion after a reasonable amount of time, or does it stick with you for a few days? Or does the adrenaline spike that you experience walking into a medical facility, I experience that. I get incredible anxiety walking into any medical facility. Does that ebb away, or does it keep you on high alert for the rest of the day? These are things you should be aware of. Staying emotionally healthy should be a prerequisite for having the focus and the energy needed to tend to other people. Now, of course, being spiritually healthy is even more important. It is what fuels our ability to sense the guidance of the Holy Spirit as we navigate through those conversations with our visits, right? So be aware of your limitations after a visit, but even in the midst of one, that might be a cue. And you say, this visit's been going on and I'm getting drained. That's a cue to start winding it down too, okay? A few more things I want to offer here. What do we do, though, after a visit, right? I mentioned at the beginning how the end of the visit is actually the beginning of another work of ministry. When you walk out that door, there are some further things that we need to keep in mind in order to continue forward in effective ministry. So let me just offer you the basics. First of all, you are expected to keep confidences, all right? If you're visiting in a medical facility, there's HIPAA issues. I'm not going to get into all the nuances involved there. But here's a simple rule of thumb. What's shared during your visit is private. It was shared with you. And that certainly includes medical information, but it really should also encompass anything that individual shares about what they're thinking, about how they are feeling. You're trying to build a relationship, trust. And that said, if there is something that you feel should be shared, perhaps with a pastor or other members of the visitation ministry, just ask permission to say, honestly, I think our pastors would really benefit from knowing this. Would you mind if I shared that? There's always an exception to this rule, and that is if the individual, of course, talks about harming themselves, harming other people. You need to disclose that, okay? And if you find yourself in a medical facility, we have residents all the time who are on watches and things for comments that have been made. Just share it with the medical staff member when it's appropriate about what you have heard, and just so that they can be aware, all right? In general, resist the temptation to post updates online or in mass broadcast prayer chains without permission, all right? You're not the source of news for everyone else. Now, another basic thing, ask them if they would like to connect with a pastor. Sometimes there's going to be theological issues and questions that arise during a visit that are beyond the scope of your visit or your ability to answer, and that is okay. Remember, you're there not to have all of the answers. So admitting that to this individual, rather than becoming bogged down during the visit, just say, that's such a great question. Would you like if a pastor maybe followed up and tried to help process that with you? Another one, as ever, continue praying. Continue praying. You may not be able to visit this individual again, but you can always pray. Pray for the individual's continued move toward health, physically, spiritually. Pray for the family of that individual as they cope with what's happening to their loved one. Thank God for the honor, for the privilege of serving him in this sort of ministry. So those are just the basics. Now, the other thing I want to encourage you to do after a visit is to be intentional with reflecting and evaluating. I find after a visit, it's helpful for me to sit down and I take my notes, not just on the what actually took place in the meeting, but also about any other things that could have gone better, right? Evaluation helps us to understand the individual, what they're going through. It's important to note things like how they're communicating and what their physical and psychological and spiritual needs might be, especially if I know I'm going to visit them again next time. Take those notes. Remembering those little details isn't actually so much about remembering as it is about being better at reflecting and evaluating after your visit. Throw them in a notebook, and then I open that up before I go to my next visit. And I have so many residents who are floored when they're like, how did you remember that? It means the world to them, right? Because I took the time to create a log on that. Now, if you know others are going to be visiting with that individual, it can be helpful to pass along some notes. Now, again, being cognizant of the things not to share, but it's helpful to say they're very hard of hearing. For example, that's super helpful for me to know so I can come in prepared, right? Or just a couple points of interest that they loved talking about the ball game, and so, okay, appreciate knowing that. Just sharing some of that information. Some of the things you might want to include in your evaluation. Was there any one-way conversation? Did I encourage that individual to explore, to clarify their statements that were made? Did I notice any of my own negative emotional reactions? Did I ask questions with yes and no answers? That's not going to be very conducive to conversation. How can I rephrase those next time to be more conducive? What was the facility or the home situation like? How was my visit received by family and staff? And we'll talk about this here in a moment. We're assuming at this point most of them want you to be there, but you might encounter situations where there's a lot of emotions going on. Did family appreciate my visit? Were they skeptical? Were staff annoyed by my presence because they're busy doing stuff? What difficulties did I encounter? How did I react to the individual's situation? Could I have handled these things differently? We talked about some of the things that you might see, the things that you might smell or hear. Did I respond appropriately to those? Where did I excel in my approach? What went right? What could improve next time? Did I spend sufficient time with the Lord in preparation for my visit? Or did I bring the needs of the Lord together with this individual in prayer? Sometimes we walk out and like, oh man, we didn't get to anything spiritual. That was just a social visit, right? And that's something to be aware of. And like, how could I have made sure to incorporate that? You want to consider doing this evaluation maybe with someone else. We talked about that earlier. There's someone else that can come alongside you and can offer some help and guidance to say, you know, what I have found helpful in that situation is this or that. So if you're part of a visitation team, to say, you know what, I didn't think this went well. What do you do in that situation? And debrief with someone else. One more thing I want to offer at the end of a visit. Keep your word. Keep your word. It's tempting, especially with a caregiving heart, as we were talking about, to promise everything, to promise the world. Oh yeah, I'll be here, every week for you, or even every other day we'll be here, and yeah, let me take care of that at your house for you, and let me do this for you. Sometimes we overpromise because we're anxious, we're emotional. It is better to avoid promises than to make them and break them and to disappoint the person. So it's important to continue to visit the patient as you are able, especially if that's what you said you would do. Okay? Don't say it if you won't do it. If an individual is in the hospital and you would like to follow up once they go back home, check with them. Make sure that's okay. It is something I do recommend, by the way, especially after a long hospital stay. Those transition periods can be very difficult, and another great point of visitation. But make sure that's okay. It's one thing to visit me in the hospital. It's another thing. I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to be up for visitors as soon as I get home, right? Let me give you an example. At our facility, an individual might first come into our rehab unit, and then they later learn that it's actually going to be difficult for them to return back home at all. And so they came thinking, I'm going to be here short-term rehab, and now they're learning that the family's making arrangements for the individual to now move into an assisted living unit. I almost always try to follow up with those individuals when that move is made. That's a hard transition. And it can be especially difficult, compounded by the fact, like, I thought I was going home. I didn't feel like I had closure yet here. And so they need to know that moment of uncertainty, those transitions, that you will certainly be there to love them and to support them. And if you can build that relationship, you have that to say, you know what, everything's changing, but I appreciate your constancy. That can be really great. But don't overpromise, but keep your word. Now, something to consider. In some context, you might not know this individual. If you're going to follow up, you might need to know a home address, a phone number, collect the information that's necessary. That's one of the things that I would love to follow up with you afterward, and you leave and you're like, oh, shoot, I don't know how to. Get the information that you need, okay? With a few minutes here that I have, I want to address a couple things here. Some of you have asked me some questions kind of in between sessions, and I know there's a lot of nuances and very particular use cases here, but I want to try to address, what do we do when? And two kind of particular things. Like, what do we do when you find yourself in a situation where you don't know what to do? What do we do when we don't know what to do? There are going to be situations that sometimes arise, especially within a hospital visit, when you find yourself uncertain as to, what do I do? That's just going to happen. There's going to be, for example, maybe a family meeting where decisions are needing to be made. That sometimes occurs. And the family has to discuss even things like life support and really, really difficult situations. And like it or not, when you are present, and especially if you have been faithfully present, you might be invited to participate and to share your thoughts. And you're going to say, oh, geez, I just came to be here and to visit, and now you're welcomed into these deep conversations. What do we do? Generally speaking, I would advise, do not convince them to do anything that they don't want to do on a particular issue, okay? Instead, here's what I might offer to say instead. Say, this is a really, really difficult but important decision, and without doubt, you need God's discernment and his wisdom and his guidance. So maybe we should just pray with one another. And just pray for God's discernment and wisdom. In fact, I would advise you, do that at any moment when you don't know what to do. Okay, it might not be that particular scenario that I just painted. So, what do you do when you don't know what to do? Say that. Say, I don't know what to do here. I need some wisdom. I think you need some wisdom. We should go to the source of wisdom together. Would that be okay? I confess when we first began, it doesn't matter how many bedsides I've come into when a patient is passing, I don't know what to do. I just don't. Every family is unique. Every individual is unique, and I often begin that way when I walk into that room and say, none of this is familiar to me, even still, and I know it's not to you either. But I know the God who walks through all of this with us, and none of it is strange to him. And if we could just maybe go to him for some wisdom and guidance during this moment, just begin with prayer. Okay. Second, sometimes, I should offer this. Sometimes you can help that family to also clarify facts. So ask clarifying questions like, that's a great question. What do you think their pros are? What do you think their cons are? You're not even, steering them a direction. You're just helping them to clarify. Second thing, what do you do when the visit isn't going as you imagined it would go? Right? I'm going to be honest with you. Unfortunately, there's going to be situations with family members where the lines get crossed. It could be verbally, even physically. The visit is not going the way that you imagined it would go. Families can be rude. They can be short. They can be angry. They can be bitter. What do you do then? I guess the first thing I want to encourage you is it is okay to establish and to set boundaries for yourself. It is understandable that people need to express their frustration. They need to vent at certain times. Sometimes they just need someone to listen to their frustrations. Even if you aren't the right person, they express them to you. I will come into the chaplain and as a chaplain, and I will hear about everybody else and what's going on. And I'm really not the right person to talk to, but I can listen. I can listen. Now, at the same time, that does not mean that you should become a punching bag for individuals either. Expressing your boundaries and your limitations is incredibly appropriate in those types of interactions. Like when you find yourself in a situation that is crossing a line, you can respectfully communicate your boundaries. Try saying something like, hey, I can't allow myself to be treated or spoken to in that way. And I really am just trying to express my care and my concern for your family, for your loved one. And I can understand that you're upset. That makes a lot of sense. But it might be best if I leave now and maybe I can come back at a later time. And just, you're expressing care and concern, but you're also establishing boundaries. I want to offer this. As I mentioned earlier, any form of compassionate ministry, it's going to take its toll. What do you do when the visit doesn't go as imagined? What do we do when things go sideways and we are discouraged? I want to encourage you, even in those moments, to always look for the beauty that is hidden within the dark moments. Always look for the beauty that's hidden even in the darkest of moments. You will find that which you are looking for. There's a beautiful illustration from Tish Warren Harrison in her book, Prayer in the Night. I'm going to read a portion of it. She says, there is an entire class of flowers that only bloom at night. Moonflowers, even primroses and other night bloomers can only be glimpsed in full glory if you venture out after dark. And there are things in our lives, too, that only bloom in the dark. I'm afraid of the dark. But increasingly, I'm more afraid of missing the kind of beauty and growth that can only be found there. You can find beauty in those moments too. And just because it's hard, it's difficult, shouldn't be a reason for us to avoid it and to dodge it. There's a beauty to be found in those moments too. Scott Carnes, American poet, said the hard way is pretty much the only way that most of us manage to learn anything. Affliction, suffering, pain are, even if they are nothing else, remarkably effective. I adamantly believe that even in those difficult moments, there's beauty. There's beauty to be found. There's things to be learned. There's grace to be given. There's grace to be received. Things are not always going to go as planned. And at the same time, there may be things, beauties, that can only be experienced in those moments. This is a conversation I often have with my caregivers. What were the moonflowers this month? When we have our monthly meeting, what were the moonflowers? And they bless me so much every time. I'm learning to become more patient than I've ever been in my entire life. That's a moonflower, right? I realize you wish it weren't cultivated in this way, but that's a beauty. Look for those. Being aware of our time, I want to offer this final quote here from J.C. Ryle. He has his essay entitled Sickness. I printed this as well as in your handout. But he says, wherever there is sickness, there is a call to duty. A little timely assistance in some cases and a kindly visit in others, a friendly inquiry and a simple expression of compassion, these may do a vast good. These are the sorts of things that soften rough edges, bring people together, and promote good feelings. These are ways by which you may ultimately lead people to Christ and save their souls. These are good deeds, and every professing Christian should be ready to do. In a world full of sickness and disease, we ought to carry each other's burdens and be kind and compassionate to one another. If you can live in a sick and dying world and not feel for others, you have much yet to learn. Out of everything that we talked, I hope that's it. It's just a desire to do what we're able to do for those that need us most. This type of ministry, by the way, is a kind of ministry that we only do here. There's going to be a day when every sad thing becomes untrue, as Tolkien puts it, and God restores all of that. We won't be visiting the sick in eternity. This is something we do here and now. I find it fascinating to me in that opening example out of the Gospel of Matthew that we began in week 1, where he says, "Those that you do, or this that you do unto the least of these, you do unto me." A lot of the examples that Jesus gives, they can be short-lived. You feed the hungry. Here's some food, right? You clothe the naked. Here's some clothes. Somebody who's thirsty. Here's a drink of water. But visiting those who are in prison, visiting those who are infirmed, that you're committed to. You don't just, I just made a visit and I'm done. And that's part of the toll. That's part of the labor behind this. There's a commitment. It takes its toll. But with that, there is immense reward and beauty to be found. I'm over the time. I want to pray with you. I had a last discussion question, but I just leave it open-ended. If there are some things along the way here that you're like, I have some questions about some things, how do I do this, or I'm experiencing this situation, please feel free to approach me. I can't promise that I have all the answers, but again, I can try to listen and offer some advice or insight along the way. But with that, can I close this out in prayer today? Well, Heavenly Father, we are, again, profoundly grateful that you invite us into this ministry, that we have the privilege and the opportunity to love and to care for one another, for the least of these. Lord, I even pray specifically at the conclusion of this series that you would burden our hearts. I pray a little bit that this topic haunts each and every one of us, that as we think about those who aren't in this room today because they're in need of this sort of ministry, I pray that that weighs heavily upon our hearts and our shoulders to the point that we are compelled to do something about it, to visit. And Lord, that which you have called us to do, you have equipped and prepared us to fulfill. And so we can go with the confidence and the assurance that all that we need is ours in you. And that, Lord, you will give us the right words in that moment, and that you will be with us in that moment. We go into no visit alone. We pray for those today who are not here, who are burdened in body, in health. That, Lord, your presence would bring comfort and joy and peace to them even here and now. And so, Lord, all that we say and do, our desire is to bring you honor. It is to bring you glory. That as we serve the least of these, that we would do so with the understanding that we are serving you. So we humbly ask all this today in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank you, friends, for being here. God bless.